My name is Nick Eberts. I'm a product manager at Google. I work on GKE, it's that thing, and all the multi-cluster tools and stuff and open source. So happy to be here. This is my maybe 10th KubeCon, maybe more, I don't know. And I'm up here with my buddy Christian.
Yep, so Christian Hernandez, head of community over at Akuity, Argo CD maintainer, SIG marketing, all the open source goodness.
Did you say SIG marketing?
SIG, it's SIG too.
SIG
It's SIG marketing, yeah. So we're gonna talk about multi-cluster magics with Argo CD and cluster inventory. Hopefully, we'll convince you that there is a better way to do multi-cluster with Argo CD. So hit the next slide, please.
Got it.
All right, so it started off kind of simple, right? Deploying an application, kind of in the early days was kind of simple. We have the concept of having a Kubernetes cluster, and then we're going to deploy applications to it. And actually, it started at the very, very beginning of Kubernetes, and Nick can attest to this. Like, we kind of try to treat Kubernetes clusters like VMware clusters, and thank God we moved away from that, because I always thought that was a terrible idea. Everyone called me crazy, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, like, no, that was a terrible idea. Yeah, so we moved away from that, right? And so what we ended up going towards is like, okay, well, now we have multiple Kubernetes clusters, right? We want to deploy that same applications to multiple clusters, right? So like if you have an environment, like production environment, you are running more than one Kubernetes cluster, hope you are, and different regions, you want to deploy that same application, right? That same, instance of an application, right? We think of an application as like one entity, but it's like running in multiple clusters, right? And so as we were now creating clusters, right, we needed a way to keep a list, right? Keep some sort of inventory of like, where are we deploying these clusters? Like there's, and all its characteristics and stuff, because like now we're like, all right, now we have multiple clusters, then we have this application deploying to those clusters. What we needed to do is like, okay, well, what are these clusters, right? And so we kind of started basically saying a list, right? So this whole presentation is about lists. And in the case of Argo CD, we actually also have a list, right? We maintain a list, right? Argo CD is a cluster manager, essentially from a high-level point of view. And we maintain this in a secret, right? And it's worked okay, right? Pretty much so far. Go ahead, next slide. And so then we started to grow, right? And so adoption of Kubernetes and adoption of multi-clusters, we needed more Kubernetes clusters, right? And so we have kind of like this idea of like some sort of cluster manager where you're creating multiple clusters dynamically, right? So like in the case of in the open source community, they have a cluster API, right? It was kind of like a big thing, or like, all right, and each CSP has their own way of generating multiple clusters, right? There was K-ops, right, or really early on. But now that had the idea of having multiple multi-cluster applications, right? So the problem started to compound itself, because now we have a cluster manager that not only has a list of its own applications that is generating a list, we have other multi-cluster applications that also take that list and then create its own list, right? And so Argo CD is a consumer of lists, and what we saw, next slide please, is that we keep inventing lists, right? Everyone has, it keeps reinventing the list. Anytime someone comes up with a multi-cluster sort of solution, they invent a way to create a list for that, right? And so the issue with that is that we end up having to write glue code in order to do any sort of integration between multi-cluster managers, multi-cluster deployment mechanisms like Argo CD, and we keep having to reinvent this wheel, right? And so next slide here, and here's like kind of like a short list, right, of having things that create multiple clusters, right? We have Kubefleet, we have also cluster management, right? We have Karmada, Kubestellar, right? Like the list goes on and on. There's also open source project that has multi-cluster mode, meaning like they are a consumer of lists. They even store their own lists, and they deploy applications to that list, right? So there's like Kubevilla, Istio is probably another one that maintains this list. And yes, even us at the Argo community are guilty of inventing a new way, right? And then there's cloud providers that try to help, right? GK Fleet, the Azure Kubernetes Fleet Manager, try to help in this regard, right? But it's sort of, kind of disjointed, right? And so, next slide. There must be a better way, right? And so, and before I pass it on over to Nick, I do wanted to put this XKDC slide here that I think highlights what we're going to say pretty soon very well, is that yes, we are proposing a new way of managing and maintaining cluster lists. So I think Nick has a pretty cool demo showing up here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're creating a new standard. How does everybody feel about that? Can I get a round of applause for a new standard?
Standard, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so this was shipped last release in November. Cluster profiles in SIG-Multicluster. So shout out to SIG-Multicluster participants if you're in here. And essentially what it is a pointer that points to a cluster. And you could do things like populate that pointer with metadata and kind of rely on that as the central sort of list of metadata and information about that particular cluster. So on its surface, it doesn't really sound amazing, but when you actually look at like all of the disparity that we have in the ecosystem of different people maintaining different lists, I think that it's going to help the community out a bunch. And this is sort of how I look at it. There's more things on the left and the right, but these are just the ones that I called out. So just imagine you essentially have some producers, some providers like GKE, AKS, multi-cluster runtime coming soon, right? And they're generating lists of clusters. But what if they were generating lists of clusters and then also maybe piping that list into a management cluster that's central? So then you can rely on a label that you put, for example, on a GKE cluster getting propagated to this open source cluster profile, right? So that kind of removes the need for you having to write some code that says every time I add a new cluster to my infrastructure as code, I have to add a label here and here and here, and it's kind of annoying, right? So we're trying to like remove that friction. And wouldn't it be great too if you didn't also have to create an Argo CD secret for every single cluster? Now, that's not possible today, but I'm hoping that we can get there, right? So the idea here is that you can plug these multi-cluster tools into that list as well. We have tools like Argo CD, which I'll show you later, that my team has built generators for plugins so that it can watch cluster profile, and I'll show you a demo of that. There's a project called Q. Anyone familiar with Q? Yeah, okay, so Q is great, wraps around jobs, make them not as dumb as they were before. There's also like a multi-queue aspect, which means that I can run these sort of multi-queue, like queues of jobs on a central cluster, and then maybe go hunt capacity across my fleet. So if you're doing AI and ML training, yay, we are, right? Maybe you want to go chase GPUs across more than one cluster in your fleet, right? So that's kind of multi-queue's purpose. And then today, right here, I'm announcing this thing called Multi-Cluster Orchestrator, which kind of does the same thing as multi-queue, but it does it for serving workloads. So you centrally kind of have a brain that's able to search through the capacity that you have within your fleet and find the right place to put your workload. And so that's what I'm going to demo today. But before we get there, I just want to say that we formally had a process and decided that we would call this management cluster the hub cluster. I would like active boos if you disagree. No? Everyone's good with hub cluster? Not admin
I heard
cluster?
one over there.
Oh, you got one? Okay.
But in general, it looks like it's okay.
Pile on this PR if you ever want to make a change. But the idea is, again, you have a central management cluster, and I even know, I'm not as deep in Argo CD as I used to be, but I understand that there's some effort to kind of redistribute Argo a little bit so that you have kind of a central control plane and a distributed data plane of syncers. So this would apply in this scenario as well. So this is MCO, Multi-Cluster Orchestrator. It's an open source project that we're releasing. It takes the dependency on cluster profile, and its job is to go hunt for capacity. The idea here is that the providers of the infrastructure will have a plugin, so they can provide their special sauce to go find computers that can meet the requirements of a particular job. And it's going to sort of, you're going to be able to give the orchestrator a workload and a priority, and that priority is a list of clusters, regions, or labels ordered in which is the most acceptable kind of target for a particular workload, right? And then what it does is when you first deploy a workload, it's going to land on the best cluster, that meets your requirements, but also has capacity. And then over time, it's going to continuously watch for events that indicate that it is out of capacity or needs to add that workload to another particular cluster. It largely depends on there being a load balancer across multiple clusters. So if you're not using multi-cluster load balancing, this would be probably difficult to achieve, so you should look at that too. And from here on out, we got 15 minutes of demos. So where's your guitar?
Yeah, it's stuck at custom, so that's the best I can do is the GIF of me playing guitar. So.
All right, so I'm going to switch to demo mode, and we are going to pray that the internet on my phone works well enough. Okay, so this is also announcing Google Console has dark mode coming for you all.
Yeah.
Yay. And so here's my fleet, right? Within my fleet, I have 4 clusters. One of them is a hub, and the other 3 are just application clusters. And within Google, it's the way that you annotate that hub cluster is just through a label. So I'm just going to show you a quick describe here. Come on, internet, let's go. There it goes. All right. And you can see here that there's a label that says, hey, this is the cluster inventory management cluster. See, you can see we even refuse to call it hub, but we'll get there. And so that makes that sort of cluster special. And then there's the list of clusters that are running across the fleet. And then I will show you, so this demo is a demo of a deployment that is running on VLLM. Savvy? Are you familiar with VLLM? Okay, so VLLM is kind of an inferencing server. There's a bunch of them out there now. I think that's the one that's being most adopted. And it's serving up, I think, Hugging Face 3B model. And if I shoot a request over to it, I'm going to curl and ask the Hugging Face model who I am. This is always risky, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it'll reply something like, an amazing presenter. There it goes. All right. And so it's always interesting. Let's see. What can we learn about here? I am truly unique and intensely complex figure in contemporary literature. I don't think that's true. I just wanted to show you all this because you shouldn't trust these things. Okay? But anyway, you're going to serve them up to people because we all want to get paid. And so if you look at the, I'm going to go into Object Explorer and show you what that thing looks like. This is the CRD. So we had to make a CRD because we need more in the community. And this is the CRD that you use to interface with the multi-cluster orchestrator. You can see it's called a multi-Kubernetes cluster placement. And within that placement, I define important things like I'm using a regex to kind of slice through all of the clusters I have in my fleet because maybe I don't want this workload to potentially land on any cluster I have. What's coming soon, you don't see here, is you'll be able to set the priority, right? So you'll be able to maybe set the priority and say this cluster is the primary cluster for this workload. Prefer it before searching out anywhere else. And then the other thing that it does is it emits a status. And so at any point in time, once this is deployed, its job is to make a recommendation on which cluster best fits the workload based on the priorities you gave it and the capacity that we have, right? And so you can see right now it's saying, hey, you need to be in US West 4 because I already deployed this. And so if we look at the deployment, you can see it is indeed in, where are you? Yeah, US West 4, that's the location. Okay, so what I'm going to do, hoping my Cloud Shell didn't time out, I'm going to use good old-fashioned Apache Bench to throw a pile of load at this inference. And so right now I'm sending, 1,000 concurrent requests to add up to 1 million for some time at this endpoint. And immediately, the system is going to react, right? So the first thing that will happen is I have an HPA on this deployment, so it'll scale out like the HPA, and I think I have it capped at 3, so it should, once the load pushes the custom metric that I have emitting for queue depth on that VLLM app, As exceeded, it will start to scale out to 3 pods. It's going to hit 3 pods pretty quick. I have this configured so essentially a 1 pod request size is equal to a node because I'm trying to make it fail. I want to kind of get a stock out. And once it hits that 3 node limit, it will then kind of like fake stock out and then try to find another region. You can see right now it's scaling out to the next 3 pods. And while I am stalling, let me just make sure my port forward is still working. This is an acceptable way to access the Argo UI, right? Just port forwarding? Okay. So let's just refresh this and see if it's catched. Oh. So yeah, and it did. So the other part of this that I wanted to call out too is that the multi-cluster orchestrator is just making recommendations on clusters, and my team also wrote an Argo CD plugin that is, you use via an application set generator that will basically watch the status that I showed you of that placement for recommendations of clusters and then generate applications for each cluster it recommends. So in this way, we're using cluster profiles kind of centrally behaving as an inventory across all my clusters, and then I'm driving everything through that open source cluster profile, MCO, and Argo CD. Let's see.
So as capacity is getting added,
yeah,
those clusters automatically get added because it's watching that list.
Well, yeah, so we're not, just to be clear, like we're not creating clusters, we're just recommending to Argo to place this workload on particular clusters. And you can see now it's trying to add the second cluster. And in a minute or so, you'll see that it'll go green, probably by the end of this talk. And then after some time, it'll actually contract, right? So one of the things that you could set here is you could set the, almost like a buffer or a scale down time. So you could say, hey, I want you to scale down if the workload in the non-primary cluster is idle for more than an amount of time. MCO will then go ahead and just remove that workload. So one of the super difficult problems that this thing solves is, I don't know if anyone's tried to HPA from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0 without using a FAS. It doesn't actually work. So, and with GPU, when you're in the AI/ML space, GPUs are quite expensive. So, and the answer being run an instance that's kind of warm in every region to defend against stockout is an expensive one, because like we have GPUs in Google, I think, that are something like $1 million a month. It's not cheap. So anyway, the idea here is to be much more efficient on utilization of that capacity. All right, let's see. It's going to go eventually. Yeah. So it's so as we wait for my demo to finish, I think the point here is that we're really trying to work upstream to kind of normalize the way that we reason about groups of clusters, and we also don't want to reinvent CD tool chains. I think we have enough of those, and so Argo CD, since it's so prominently used, was kind of the first of the plugins that we built, but this is extendable to any CD system that you want. Yeah. Any questions? I can go back over to slides and we can wrap. And oh, so there we go. So it did eventually add that, add a deployment into Europe West. And then if we give it enough time, it'll scale down because the load has ceased to being generated. But anyway, let's go back over here. Go back to slideshow. That was a little anticlimactic, but I would appreciate some applause. Thank you. All right. So call to action. If this is at all interesting to you, or if you do want to plug your tool into cluster inventory, join SIG-Multicluster. We need more use cases. This standard will only be successful if people are actually using it. And don't be scared to join the SIG either. I was when I first started joining up with Kubernetes stuff. Everybody's pretty friendly. You don't have to talk. You can just lurk. It's fun. So join the SIG. Reach out to me directly if you want, or Christian. And of course, there's the options to communicate with us via Slack or on the CNCF or the Kubernetes channels. That's it. That's my TED Talk. And you should buy this man's book or read it.
So yeah, so slight commercial, but I am writing a book. Argo CD up and running. I'm writing it with Andy Block. He's at Red Hat, right? Another Argo CD maintainer. So out later on this year, right? Get the updates there. Download a free copy. It's there, the QR code. So take a picture or scan it, either way. And yeah, check out my book, Compliments of Akuity. So it's free to download once it's ready. Probably November, so KubeCon North America-ish time is when the book will be out.
Yeah, and then so Christian and I are going to be playing at a bar tonight.
There you go.
Yeah, strictly Metallica and Meshuggah covers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so very loud.
This is my dream. I'm just putting it out there just to see if it can go through. Anyway, all right, thank you all.
It's all right. Yeah, thanks.